and we've got Mr. Ben Smith, Director of Finance, online. Ben?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will be brief on the outturn report because I suspect questions may be on things only tangentially related to it. As one of my predecessors would say, the outturn report by now is chip paper, but it's still nonetheless relatively important chip paper given some of the widespread national reporting of current budget pressures in local government. I think probably the important thing to draw your attention to is Appendix A, which is page 23, because it puts it all on a page. A pleasing outturn in the sense that all directorates managed to underspend against their service budgets, but a word of caution, as I advised to Cabinet, given that the budgets for corporate services in place were significantly enhanced by draws from reserves, and you can see in the rest of the report there was a carry forward request of nearly £14 million of that £17-18 million service underspending. I would not want readers to draw the wrong conclusion that everything was rosy in local government, both in Swansea and across the UK. Once those reserves drop out, you're down to only a couple of £1 million worth of core underspending in services. And given there are some very substantial persistent inflation pressures, and a reminder that the budget set for the current year provided for a local government pay award unresolved, part of the teachers' pay award not fully implemented, and not enough money to put money in the base budget for enhanced energy costs, because 22-23 was the last year where we had the advantage of those fixed low-cost energy costs, and we now know we're paying the commercial market rate in 23-24. So it's important that the service spending, whilst commendable, and every directorate followed the instruction from Cabinet to not overspend, I must emphasise that it doesn't take a genius to work out with all of those pressures, and once those reserves drop out, that there will be pressures in the current year. In terms of the appendix, it will again come as no surprise for those of you that are on this panel. You've heard me come for a number of years and indicate that underspending due to slippage on the capital programme, coupled with a rather fortuitous ability to have borrowed rather large sums of money at cheap as chips interest rates, further turbocharged by temporarily being able to loan those amounts out at variable rates of above 5% when we borrowed at below 2%, result in yet another windfall underspending on capital financing. You've had that for several years now. It is likely to continue to some extent into 23-24. But as we draw down our cash balances and try to avoid, frankly, not borrowing, if at all possible, given elevated interest rates, which are going to be higher and for longer, you can expect some temporary relief there. And it's a nice problem to have. Many of the councils in England that are struggling have got short-term borrowing that they're having to refinance now at elevated rates. It's a problem I'd rather have than not have. But again, those are temporary respites and all help to cushion the council from some of the real pressures that are floating around in the local government universe. I'll draw your attention next to the line marked earmarked reserves. Now, those earmarked reserves show a draw of just about £2 million of our own. That's to be coupled with £8 million above the line of the draw from schools reserve. So this is an outturn report that indicated in 22-23, which was still relatively benign for this council, there was a £10 million draw from reserves. Having said that, it was materially lower than the originally assumed draw from earmarked reserves, and I repeat the advice I gave to Cabinet, which is it means we live to fight another day because we're able to roll over those unused reserves, and there will be another major deployment of reserves in the current year. But in line with every treasurer in Wales and the rest of the UK, it is not a sustainable financial position. Our degree of sustainability is just better than most, because of our borrowing strategy and because of our relatively large earmarked reserves. But a council that outturns and spends £10 million more than it's got in its base budgets will not last for forever on that metric. Having said that, having drawn much less than the planned reserves, as I say, it means we carry it forward into the following year. There are other councils that do not enjoy that luxury. And then I think the only other item I need to draw your attention to is right at the bottom, because those of you that have been on the panel have heard me come for the past 3 years and indicate grave concern over the level of our ability in terms of collecting council tax. We have posted multiple years of deficits on collection fund, and prudently council did reduce the assumed rate of collection in setting the budget for 23-24. I am really pleased to draw your attention. It's only a small surplus, but a £32,000 surplus on collection of council tax means we have turned the corner after 3 years of really struggling. That does mean we should be in a good position in the current year. What may start to play out is, of course, household budgets are under the cosh, and whilst council tax remains a statutory debt and has to be paid because it is a demand notice, we may find people struggle to pay, and we are seeing some evidence that people's struggling to pay in their circumstances are seeing more and more people take up council tax reduction scheme, reductions to council tax, which is a locally administered benefit. And that's something we've tended not to overspend on, but we do run the risk of potentially even overspending on that, I think, indicative of household pressures. But the outturn was pleasing for 22-23. The big message is do not assume it is going to continue in 23-24 to be quite so benign. And the outlook, of course, as I've said, across the whole of local government looks really challenging. I think that's all I need to draw attention to in terms of the main general fund report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions or comments? Right, start off with Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Just some clarification. I think, the borrowing strategy, I think everybody agrees it was marvellous that we, so we say, rejigged the borrowing to get lower interest rates. You actually mentioned a figure of 10 million lower costs with regards to finance costs. You also mentioned that is that going to carry on? How long is that going to carry on for? And we've also got, shall we say, a good period of time with the MRP at the moment, which is going to turn negative shortly. So, is that 10 million going to carry on? And when will the MRP actually kick in?
So you're right, and it's a perennial question. It will continue to some extent throughout 23-24. I don't expect to quite repeat the level of it's about £9 million in the outturn for 22-23. I don't expect it to be quite so good because we are starting to draw down cash balances quite significantly. We have committed capital spend, which, as members will be aware, I am deferring externalising future borrowing. I've got council approval for a borrowing window of up to another £50 million worth of capital over the life of the existing MTFP, and an obligation to fund £25 million of the Mumbles CRMP scheme, the Coastal Risk Management Programme scheme. Now, we're getting RSG for that in the very short term, but I haven't yet had to go and borrow the money. The strategy consistent with the MTFP is to sit and burn through cash reserves as far as possible until I have to go out to borrow money. But make no mistake, I am already on the hook on your behalf for going out and externalising 75 million quid. At some point. It will be as late as I can afford to defer it, given we are not going to repeat interest rates at 1.89%. The PWLB at the moment is over 5. There is likely to be another base rate increase imminently. And our costs of borrowing are directly linked to the issuance of UK government gilts. I do expect eventually rates to come down. I would ideally like to time it that I'm able to borrow back out with the PWLB at closer to the pool rate, which is around 3.5%. I may have to borrow slightly higher than that. So that burn rate on capital that we're using are cash balances, and the fact that interest rates will not stay as high throughout the whole of the MTFP. I do expect it to unwind quite significantly, but you've certainly got bonus for 23-24 and probably some bonus for 24-25, because that capital financing line is a mixture of fixed long-term borrowing for 50 years and short-term gains on interest rates. And at the moment, as I say, I'm in the fortunate position of having a nice problem, being a treasurer who's got everything fixed long for 46, 47, 48, 49, 50 years and lending it out short term for 6 months at 5% plus. You are right to also draw attention, Councillor Jones, to the MRP position. The advice I gave to council, it's undoubtedly the case that the minimum revenue provision currently is less than it was under the old regime. I have a permission from council, and council has never changed the strategy, which is any penny saved on the minimum revenue provision is prudently tucked away into that capital equalisation reserve. And it is one of the reasons why when it comes to councils getting into difficulty and balancing their budget, it's always tempting to look to, can we just dip into earmarked reserves? And gosh, why have councils got such large earmarked reserves? You have prudently, as a council, despite some differences of opinion over the strategy itself, but you have prudently, collectively given me permission to set those sums aside for exactly the reason you've identified, which is eventually they will reverse and it will cost us more than it used to under the old regime. I remain confident that I expect the amounts that we're saving and setting aside in the capital equalisation reserve should last for the whole of the existing MTFP. I have indicated to this panel before, I would hope to stretch it to about 2030, but it is going to depend on how fast we spend committed capital sums as items come through to Cabinet, and what happens to the council's overall budget in terms of the local government finance settlement. Because whilst I will continue to give strong, prudent advice that any short-term savings are set aside to smooth the cost of capital, it will, of course, be a policy decision for council, as it will be for every council, if they're facing difficulties in having to balance the 24, 25 and onwards budgets. And there will not be a treasurer in the land who is not giving advice to their scrutiny committees and budget setting committees that the budgets are likely to be incredibly challenging. Don't forget, the budget we set for 23-24 was on a basis of a relatively generous 7% plus settlement from the Welsh Government. The forecast was meant to be 3% going forward, and I think everyone is aware that commentary from both UK government and Welsh government is things are about to get quite tight, and there may be some recalibration of expectations as to how generous or otherwise the settlement will be. In any scenario, it is not going to keep pace with inflation and wage pay awards, and so it will be another real terms cut. So there may be some tensions between setting an easier budget for 24-25 versus the long-term prudent option. I will continue to give strong advice to Cabinet and Council. Council has always adopted my advice, which is to prudently set sums aside and save them. That will continue to be my advice on the record, but of course it will be for members ultimately to make policy decisions, because I have to be a realist. Policy choices may have to be made that favour short-term decisions over longer-term ones. It's an inevitability of the public sector and the politics of it all. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben. And perhaps a different subject, although you touched on it, with regard, excuse me, with regards to school reserves. There's a figure of £8 million. That's 22-23. How is that actually apportioned, against each school? Because some schools have got, shall we say, large reserves, and others have got, quite small, or even, I'm not quite sure, perhaps negative reserves. So how is it apportioned? And how, when we actually go forward, is there going to be another call for reserves from their reserves in the future?
So I caught most of that. Apologies, my internet broke up ever so slightly, but certainly I've got the bit about the schools reserves. It is a mixed picture, you're right to flag it. We remain, and I think the results will be out in October, we remain fortunately collectively one of the richest authorities in terms of schools balances, even after the £8 million draw. I would be surprised if we're not in the top 3 in Wales. Inevitably, given the pressures on schools' budgets and some of the uncertainty going forward, I do expect there to be a further draw from schools' reserves in 23-24. The School Budget Forum indicates the same. In terms of schools in deficit, we are relatively fortunate. There are a very small number of schools with deficits at the moment and needing to rely on a recovery plan. But you're absolutely right. Any headline does mask difficulties, and as things get tighter, there will be more schools in deficit situations. A couple of the current schools have had to have budget deficits considered by me and sanctioned in conjunction with the Director of Education. But it can only get tighter. I would again emphasise, though, that relative to most other councils in Wales, we are in a fortunate position, but that is no comfort to a governing body, and most members are on at least one or more governing bodies when you are faced with a deficit situation in each individual school. it will be a growing difficult position for probably more and more schools, simply because as those balances will reduce. I would be very, very surprised if there isn't a reduction. I would, however, remind, in the same way that I do remind School Budget Forum, don't forget what the position was before COVID. This council had 60 million in earmarked reserves, and it's got 160 million in earmarked reserves. I would say the same for schools. Before COVID, we were the richest schools in Wales collectively, at £8 to £9 million in schools reserve. So yes, they went up to 28 million. Yes, they've been drawn down by 8 million. So to some extent, there were significant gains. And yes, from the very high point, a concern around the level of draws from balances. And I don't want to underplay that, because head teachers are very concerned, and I know governing bodies are concerned, and doubly so if you're a governing body that's got an already likely deficit position in year, and understanding that their cumulative reserves are not going to last for forever. But it's still from a relative position of strength. But it's undoubtedly the case that all schools are going to struggle financially across Wales, across England. There's no doubt about it in my mind. And part of it isn't helped by the uncertainty over, as I say, the Teachers' Pay Award is meant to be implemented from this month, with a grant offer to guarantee that there is no impact on schools' budgets. I still await for the detail of that, as do head teachers and governing bodies. And they are equally impacted by what happens with the Local Government Pay Award. There is no prospect nationally of the Local Government Pay Award being settled before November of this year. I mean, that's not great for individual schools' budgets. It's associate staff are a smaller part of schools' budgets, but it's still a material uncertainty. So the uncertainty factor is really, really heightened at a point in which all signals are indicating the public finances are likely to be under some strain in real terms, whatever scenario plays out nationally over the next couple of years.
Councillor Peter Black.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a specific question, and Ben may have to come back to me on this one in relation to page 12. I noticed that we're being asked to carry forward £3.8 million for the Oracle project for the next financial year. Now, I can't remember the exact budget for this, but it must be near 50% of the total budget, and a lot of money not to spend in the last financial year. So I was just wondering, is it possible to have a financial sort of breakdown, profile, if you like, of the expenditure on this project, so we can see how this project has worked its way through from inception in terms of expenditure? I think that clearly this project looks like it's going to need much closer scrutiny.
I think I can partly answer that on the basis of what is planned. The project is coming to a close, and there is an intention to bring a report to Cabinet, both in terms of reporting on the overall project when we return to business as usual, and that would include a reminder to Cabinet and the opportunity for this scrutiny panel to look at it in terms of what the original budget was, how much it was stretched, and why there was a need to carry forward sums, and how much is being spent in the current year. So I think it probably appropriate, if you're able to live with the timeline on it, that naturally probably by October time it would be due to go through to Cabinet anyway, and that would be the opportune time for you to see the overall life cycle of the project and what it has cost. The carry forward request is probably more like a quarter of the overall project from the individual bits that have gone since it was first uplifted. But I would prefer, given that Sarah Lackenby will be taking the report through to Cabinet in due course, that we probably use that as the means, as long as scrutiny panel is happy to wait that period of time. We are close enough to closing off the project to, I think, it coming to a natural point for it to be on the public record, which will give you the opportunity to raise those questions and scrutinise it in detail, Councillor Black.
What we're saying is that they weren't able to spend £3.8 million in 12 months, but they're going to spend it in 6 months in terms of the current financial year. I still would like to see a financial profile of expenditure on this. I think it's important that we see, where this has gone wrong, because clearly I think we effectively doubled the budget at one stage, and we're still in a situation where the project hasn't closed down. It's way over time, and I think at the same time, I'm not sure, from what I've been hearing, it isn't working properly either. So I think there does need to be much closer scrutiny on this.
So the bit I would answer now, I mean, as I say, I'll be guided by panel as to what they want in advance, and I can feed back to Sarah Lackenby. But as I say, it will also be coming through to Cabinet in due course. The reason for the carry forward, as you rightly attest, Councillor Black, is that there are ongoing issues and there is slippage into the current year. There is still support under the Oracle implementation phase at this point in time in September. So there are issues, and that's part of the reason for the carry forward. And there is substantial spend in the current year. But I'm happy to be guided by the chair and yourself as to whether you want a proactive report here or to another forum before it goes to Cabinet. I would just advise that I think the timelines are such that the two are, in my view, sufficiently close to each other to give you that on the record position. But I will be guided by yourselves, of course, as to when you would wish to see an update report.
I think given the amount of money involved and given the positions we will ask for the timeline now. And if the timeline is sufficiently close enough, we'll wait until the report, but we will ask Sarah for the timeline prior to making that decision.
I think this is due to come to Scrutiny Programme Committee possibly in October. I'm not sure, but and I think at the same time, I would also like to know, is there a retention involved here? Because once we've signed off with Oracle and we get further problems, there must be some sort of contractual safeguards for the council in terms of how well this performs.
Okay, so
I think they can be picked up in due course, Chair, and I think you're right. I will feed back to Sarah. I'm seeing Sarah later, and we'll refresh on the timeline. And if it works, we'll do it once. If it needs to be done sooner, we'll do it beforehand. But yeah, and it will include referencing sums held back and what contingency sums we've got for things that may still come out of the woodwork. Because as you say, these projects are never fully done. And there will be a return to business as usual, but still with some teething issues. Thank you, Chair, for clarifying the position, and I thank Councillor Black for his questions.
Councillor Mary Jones.
My question was similar to Councillor Peter Black's, and if we are going to have a report back, although I'm not on Scrutiny Programme Committee, so I wonder how we will get the feedback, because obviously we're finance, and I was concerned about the slippage, and I wanted to know, are we expecting any more slippage, or are we being asked for more money in the future? So I'd like, I think, a bit more information about.
Well, I think if after your meeting today, Ben, if you could give us an indication of what the timeline is, then we can go from there and I can report back to the board.
Yep, I'm more than happy to relay that over to Sarah later today, because I'm seeing her later. And I think just to address Councillor Mary Jones' point, the final point, which is irrespective of what does go to Scrutiny Programme Committee in terms of Councillor Black's ask, there will be a report going to Cabinet, and any report that's going to Cabinet can also obviously come here as well. So you've got the opportunity for pre-decision scrutiny on it if it goes to Scrutiny Programme Committee, but there will be opportunities for all of you on this panel to see the report that goes to Cabinet. So I still think you've got two different fora to have bites of the cherry on it, but one may be more proactive than the other, because obviously today's report is about stuff that has happened. So I think you've got both opportunities, which may address the concern that Councillor Mary Jones raised. But I will feed back to Sarah Lackenby later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Ben, I can see in some of the, shall we say, underspends, it actually relates to, vacant posts. But actually reading on, page 13, it actually says with regards to the director's comments. No, sorry, I lost it. They've actually, the directorate is just set to deliver recurrent savings of 2.8 million in 23-24, which includes the removal of vacant posts and reductions in supplies. So are we actually saying that even though the vacant posts are actually, shall we say, going forward to provide an underspend, we're actually getting rid of those posts altogether? Are we keeping posts, perhaps permanently vacant, or is it difficult for people to actually fill these posts? And in this instance, we're actually saying that those posts are going to be removed from the budget, so those posts are going to go permanently.
So to some extent, I'm not sure which of the directorates you're referring to, but
it's page 13, sorry.
Page 13, but the principle.
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Yeah, but the principle of it is it's a combination. We would not pretend otherwise than in some areas it is proving incredibly difficult to fill posts. Local government is not always the most competitive of payers. For all the talk of pay rises in the economy as a whole and falling short of inflation but keeping up to some extent compared to previous years' pay awards, it doesn't apply in the whole of local government. Teachers have had a pay award. The national pay negotiations for local government are utterly stalled. Nothing this council can do about it. That is not a particularly attractive part of the offer. It is well documented that in some areas of high demand, high skill or specialism, but also in areas where perhaps the skills are I tread carefully, lower graded, but of value to society. I'm thinking particularly of social care posts where there is a perennial struggle. I think you've all seen and read the anecdotes of how difficult it is to fill some posts. And I think it applies across the piece. So by default, posts end up being hard to fill. Some are deliberately held a little bit vacant to help manage overall budgets. And the budget strategy going forward, given that they're likely to be extremely tight real terms settlements, it would be perfectly logical for directors to hold posts vacant and be preparing to not fill all of them if they cannot be afforded. I won't speak for the other directors, but as a director in my own right, managing my own function, I do exactly that. I have struggled to fill a number of posts. And a number of them I do not fill on a permanent basis, partly because I am preparing for the inevitability of what is likely to come in terms of our core spending power. So I would leave it to other directors to explain their mix, but I think the reality is it's a mix of all three. Some posts are incredibly difficult to fill, and elements of the local government offer, as much as we're a big employer, we're a caring employer, we're flexible, and we've got a whole raft of other things. It doesn't help when you've had a pay, my staff have had a pay rise of 0. Every other director would say the same for all of their local government staff. They're facing going through to November, December with a pay rise for last year of 0. That's really difficult to fill some posts. It's an inevitability. And I will always I'd love to fill all posts permanently and hold on to everyone. But the reality is if I have to keep some vacant or some temporarily filled to avoid the risk of compulsory redundancies later on, I'm always going to do that. And I would suspect every director would say the same if you asked the question of them.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Anyone online? No? Ben, I wonder if you could clarify a couple of issues. You said there's likely to externalize borrowing another 75 million. Is that correct? And sometime in the near future, in the next year or so?
It won't be in the next year or so. Certainly the budget as set, including the capital programme, agreed 50 million for other schemes. And I also referenced the 25 million pounds for the Mumble CRMP scheme, which is already underway, for which we are getting revenue support grant to pay for the capital financing costs. There is a timing difference. It's another reason why it's very, very prudent to bank the underspends in the capital equalisation reserve, because there is a timing mismatch. It's certainly not my intention, unless we run out of cash, to be forced to go out and borrow it. I mean, that's the luxury I've got, having borrowed substantially in line with our slight borrowing in advance of need, but borrowing over the life of the existing MTFP. I would look to stretch it as long as possible. Rates are currently through the PWLB above 5%. Even if I were to borrow it for a year, I would have absolutely no intention of borrowing at rates of over 5%, because it would undo all the good work of borrowing at 1.89%. As I say, my sweet spot would be to borrow that. I've got to borrow it at some point, because the spend is being committed to over a number of years. It's not all being spent this year. The Mumble seawall defences are being materially finished this year, but some of the other capital schemes include levelling up over the next 3 years. So it is my intention to push it as late as I dare, because I want to maximise the bang for the buck, as it were. And at the moment, I've got the luxury of being able to sit and wait a number of years. It's currently programmed to be at the end of the existing MTFP. Do not be surprised if I can afford it that I look to give officer advice to try and stretch it to the length of the next MTFP, i.e. defer it another year. So that's potentially through to 27, 28. If rates were to come down materially much quicker, I might go out earlier because I do need to externalise that at some point. But for the avoidance of doubt, there's absolutely no intent on my part to borrow it short term in the next year or 2 years, unless I had to, simply because we were under the cosh in terms of cash balances. We are in a very fortunate position, not only compared to England, but compared to most authorities in Wales, in having a relatively high working capital balance. We've traditionally had a high working capital balance. And although no figures are available for 21-22, when the financial resilience report was done for Audit Wales for 2021 on an all Wales basis, we had the highest working capital balance of any authority in Wales, simply because of our borrowing strategy and already sitting on the cash. So do not expect there to be any immediate needs to go out and externalize that debt. I will only do it if I'm forced to, by circumstances beyond my control, and they could be beyond my control because I don't know what the settlement's going to be. I don't know what the end pay awards are going to be, but I will look to sit and wait for as long as possible, and I at least have that luxury of being able to do that. Some colleagues do not have that luxury, and if they've got to externalise debt at the moment, you are already seeing in England, and there's already one example in Wales, of an authority saying they simply cannot afford to borrow at 5% plus interest rates and are having to significantly curtail their capital aspirations.
Yeah, on the MRP and the tipping point, also the question about the capital equalisation fund. Now, you said you're taking money that you've saved from MRP into the equalisation fund, and also money that underspent from the capital funding. So what's the split there?
So no direct underspend on capital spend itself is taken into the CER, but both combination of both the MRP saving and the interest saving,
okay.
Both are going into the capital equalisation reserve. I don't have a split stand.
It's not just the capital, it's not just the capital financing that is going in there, it's also the savings from the MRP.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? No. Okay, thank you very much, Ben, for that. The next item on the agenda is the housing revenue account. And I should imagine this is a little bit quicker than the last item. Over to you, Ben.
It is, and it's a very simple story. The HRA is relatively cash rich in terms of revenue, and a very substantial revenue contribution is made to capital every year as set out in the report. There was yet again significant slippage on the capital programme, which you see as a result of about £6 million underspend in direct revenue contributions to the capital programme for the HRA. Most of that rolls over immediately and is assumed to be spent in the following year. So you see a very significant increase in the HRA reserves at the end of 22-23, but an expectation that they're drawn down in 23-24. HRA is, of course, ultra ring fence and can be only spent for the benefit of the housing tenants. So that's why you see such an extreme movement in the relative size of the level of reserves held, but then an immediate assumption that they're going to be significantly drawn down and spent for the benefit of council tenants, because the reality is it's council tenant rents, as well as the interplay with all the other housing allowances that provides for financing of it. So there is nothing of surprise or great interest to me in the HRA. It remains looking tidily after itself and continues to rely on the revenue surpluses to significantly invest in major improvements in the housing stock and to provide some new housing, totally in line with the council strategy for the HRA. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions, Councillor Peter Black?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Ben, I noticed an increase in income from rents and other income from about £1.2 million from the actual budget. Does that mean that we're also seeing a reduction in rent arrears as well?
I recall that, yes, we were pleasantly surprised. We prudently were assuming, it's very similar to the points I made on the council tax, that we understand households are under the cosh, and there was always a risk that there would be. We do seem to be doing better than we expected. You know, it's much more resilient than we expected. So yes, that does seem to be the case.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone online? Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Thank you for both reports. Much appreciated. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the annual performance monitoring report. Councillor David Hopkins, would you like to say a few words before I bring in Mr. Richard Rowlands?
Yes, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to put on record my thanks to Richard Rowlands for preparing this report. This report is at the first stage of, it's obviously coming here today. It will go from here to audit and then on to council at a later date. But I will say the report contains some encouraging reading with improving targets, on generally improving targets, particularly when you look at the pressures within workforce and particularly in social care. But what I would say, bear in mind that we are still feeling the effects of the pandemic, particularly in certain certain areas within the council. So I've got nothing more to add to this, and I know Richard will take us through the report itself. But there are some encouraging, but some worrying aspects, I know, particularly in social care. But just to put on record, at this particular time, if there are any questions, particularly about service-led, that we haven't got the directors with us today, then obviously we will get them responses back to you as soon as we can. But just on the performance level, as I say, very encouraging in some, but we have got some concerns with particularly sickness, and are working very closely with the trade unions and our friends in HR to try to, monitor that and put some things in place to try to reduce particularly sickness levels at this point. So more than happy to hand over to Richard.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hopkins. Now, Richard, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the report starts on page 28 of your papers, and it sets out the performance indicator results for 2022-2023, meeting the Council's priorities as they've been described within the corporate plan. The overall picture of performance is set out in paragraphs 2.3 to 2.5. And in summary, that shows that at the end of 2022-2023, there were 22 indicators which showed an improvement or maintained performance when compared to 21-22, and that's just over 56%, and 25 indicators which met or bettered their targets, which is just over 69%. And these are summarised in paragraph 2.3 on pages 29 and 30 of the report. There were 2 indicators which showed a decline and 3 that missed their targets, but within 5% of the target or the previous result, and those are summarised in paragraph 2.4 of the report. And also summarised in paragraph 2.4 are some of the 15 indicators that showed a drop in performance, that's 38.5%, compared to 2021-2022, and the 8 that missed their targets, that's just over 22%, and explanations around each of those are included within the appendix attached to the report. There were also 10 performance indicators where there was no historical data to report, and also 13 with no target, including new indicators such as those introduced as a result of a new National Social Services Performance Framework introduced by the Welsh Government. In paragraph 3 on page 31, we have an update on the policy commitments that had been completed as at the end of March, and some of the detail on that can be found in paragraph 3.3, and an update on that will be coming to Council in October. And then finally, paragraph 4.1 on page 32, that notes that the performance indicators have been reviewed following the development of the new corporate plan, and that revised suite will be reported from the first quarter onwards. We've got the detailed performance data attached at Appendix A, starting on page 34, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any questions from any members? Okay, Councillor Mary Jones.
Thank you very much. I got to find it now. It's on page, I think it's 35. We can't see it very well because it's on the side. It's to do with social services, or safeguarding actually. And it states here about the adolescents associated with exploitation outside the family home. Now, I know there is a new team and it does make reference to it. And taking on board what Councillor Hopkins has just said, I want to know what work has been done with schools and how engaged they are with, schools do look after the young people, but is it a problem then that we are, encountering? And also, I think somewhere else in the report, and it might not have been in this, it's about, again, training of social workers and how we're going to get on with training the social workers, because obviously one goes hand in hand with the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Richard?
Yes, I think that's probably a question that's probably best answered by the Education Department and by Social Services. I don't know enough about the detail to be able to comment on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, we'll put it in a letter and write them. Oh, David, do you want to?
I'm not aware it's a problem, but I totally agree with Richard. I'm not in a position to answer that question at this particular time. I'm more than happy that we will give a commitment. We give a written response to that.
Okay,
So,
well, we'll put it in a
committee.
letter to him.
Okay, yeah, we're happy to do that.
Peter Black?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got some more questions to add to your letter in terms of social services.
Right.
There is a couple of indicators which are in the red on social services, and a couple of which I'm quite concerned with. The one, there's no page number on this thing, and the percentage. Yeah, the percentage of contacts received by statutory social services during the period where a decision was made by the end of the next working day. Now, clearly, that's quite important, because if somebody rings up and says this child is in danger, you need to be able to action it straight away. And we've achieved 94%, but the commentary is quite interesting, because it says, in practice, it should be noted this is a demand-driven service. The target of 100% is not likely to be achievable. So the question is, why are we trying to achieve a target which is not achievable in terms of this? And of course, can we have some assurances that if the remaining 6% are not picked up on the first day, that they are picked up on the second day? So I think it's important that we do have that assurance as part of this. This is most probably an issue for Paxton's panel, but I think, you know, if we're going to write a letter, we should do that. Then on the next page, which Mary tells me with page 40, the percentage of visited children on the Child Protection Register, we're currently at 82%. This is declining. The commentary says that this is down to a failure to not able to recruit social workers, essentially. Now, this is where we got into trouble way back, 10, 20 years ago, when children's services were in trouble. We weren't recruiting the social workers. We weren't prioritising this sort of thing. And I think it's important that these sort of indicators raise alarms, and that we do look at, is this a priority? Should we be putting more of the existing social work into this to ensure that these children are safe? And so I think that's something which I'd like some answers on from the director as well. I think that's the only one. That's the two main things I've got on children's services. Chair.
We will put these in a letter, Councillor Hopkins, to
to
social services, and ask for a written reply.
Yeah, I'm happy. I know, look, this is a national issue, particularly with social workers. It is certainly a concern. I know that we've raised this corporately, and I know that we've had this discussion. We're on about trying to grow our own wherever we can to try to train as many up as we possibly can. But it is a problem for this authority. It's a problem for every authority in Wales, and we are well aware of it and working towards it. But as I say, we will get that written response to you.
Yeah, this has been a problem for some time. I'm aware of that, and it's not just Swansea. But I think we do need to know, is this a priority? Should we put in more resource into that from what we've got, and let other things slip a bit? Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, I think the only other thing that we will be asking about, and that is is it DCP 18 small d, young people known not to be in education, and we noticed that is an issue with that. Well, we will be asking on that. The other one then is the number of permanent exclusions, but we've talked about that in the past. So I think those are issues. And the only other one, as the cabinet member, Councillor David Hopkins, has pointed out, is the sickness level, which is always a concern on every one of these particular reports. But the reality is, in many parts of our organisation, the work undertaken is very physical in some respects, and in other respects, they are dealing with some very sick individuals who some of our carers also get caught with the sickness as well. So I think there is understanding that the sickness benefits or the sickness levels that we have historically have always been high, but the actual reasons are quite significant and need to be considered when we see our sickness levels. Councillor Hopkins?
Look, yeah, it is a concern. But with the workforce strategy and with what we are doing, I know we're working very closely with the new head of HR, Richard Davis, to actually look at these in depth, and particularly to see if there's any patterns. But you are right, some of the individuals, some of the working conditions, and I'm not saying they're dangerous in any shape or form, but when you are out in all weathers and doing, collecting refuge or grass cutting, whatever, then you will get colds and that. But look, it's all about getting the right things in place to try to avoid sickness, and we are, as I say, with the workforce strategy, trying to do that and in this implementation. But it is difficult, but we will do what we can to support our staff.
I think the also about the homeless issue is one which has started to increase, but we would expect that with the current problems that the economy is seeing. I think that is an issue which unfortunately will likely to increase before it gets any better. But apart from that, some of the infrastructure issues as well, but we will put them in a letter and send them off and hope for written replies in the near future. Okay, thank you.
I just asked a question, sorry. Thank you. I just wondered if long COVID had any influence in the sickness levels of staff?
I wouldn't have the figures to hand. I don't think it's a huge issue for the authority, personally at this particular time. But I wouldn't have them to hand. I will give a breakdown of whether there is any issue related to long COVID. Okay. I would have thought there will be. It is a issue, but I don't think it's a massive issue.
I know at the minute, Gowden Library is not open today because of sickness of staff. I just wondered if it was an issue, because that's never happened in the past. Thank you.
Okay. That being the case, can we move on to item 9? Now, can I ask Richard, is there a substantial difference between the annual review of performance and the annual performance monitoring report?
They're two separate but connected documents, Chair. So the performance monitoring report is really just focused on performance indicators, whereas the annual review performance is a broader report. It takes into account a broader range of evidence, and it's probably more qualitative, really.
Okay, could I ask the question, because I know somebody will ask the question otherwise.
Yeah.
So because it does seem as if they're both the same report, but there is an explanation. So David, Councillor Hopkins, do you want to say anything before?
No, not really. Obviously, this is set on well-being objectives and a corporate plan, so nothing to add to that. But I did ask the same question in my pre-briefing with Richard, exactly the same as you did. So not a problem. So more than happy to hand over to Richard and thank him again for the work that he puts into this.
Okay, thank you, Richard. It's over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the report starts on page 84 of your papers, and it introduces the annual review performance, again for 2022-2023. So although we've done a number of these reports over the years, this is the second such report that, as described in the first paragraph of the covering report, it meets the new performance duty that was introduced by Part 6 of the Local Government and Elections Act in 2021 to publish an annual self-assessment report. So in summary, what this review does, it describes the extent to which the council is exercising its functions effectively and using its resources well in meeting its well-being objectives, which are described then in the corporate plan. But the review also fulfills the other requirement to publish an annual well-being report as required by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act by demonstrating how we're contributing to the national goals through our wellbeing objectives and doing so in a way that is sustainable, in line with sustainable ways of working. The effectiveness of governance is also part of the new performance duty that was introduced by the Local Government Elections Act, but that is already assessed in the Council's annual governance statement, which is published in the Council's statement of accounts. So we've signposted that when referring to that particular aspect of the duty. Paragraph 2 then describes the methods and the approaches that were employed to develop the review. The review was written with reference to what are called self-reflection tools, and each one of these was completed by the lead directors and heads of service for each of the 6 wellbeing objectives, as well as referring to other sources of evidence, and an overall assessment on progress and the prospects for improvement for each of the 6 wellbeing objectives were assessed using criteria, which you can see in paragraph 2.4 of the covering report. And then the outcome from this, as we set out in paragraph 2.5, was reviewed and challenged by what is called a strategic governance group, which includes the corporate management team and also a representative as well from the governance and audit committee. And then overall ratings were determined for 2022-2023 for each of the wellbeing objectives, and those are summarised in paragraph 4.1 of the recovery report on page 87. Then in paragraph 3 of the current report, we describe how the areas for improvement that were identified last year by Audit Wales, Scrutiny and Governance and Audit Committee, how they've been addressed in this year's review. So there was some concern last time around on duplication on reviewing the effectiveness of governance, and we sought to resolve that by signposting to the annual governance statement so that there's no duplication or confusion. The format of the review itself was changed to try and make it more succinct and easier to read and more accessible to the general reader, because there were lots of criticisms last year about the length of the document. The self-reflection tools that underpin the review, they were reviewed as well, and a consistent scoring criteria is now applied throughout the review. A new section has been included to try and show the links between the performance and the risk assessments, to show that those two things are linked together. And I think, fundamentally, we've tried to make the review more analytical than the first attempt last year. So to that end, we've included some commentary on strengths and challenges, and then tried to make the overall assessment for each wellbeing objective more evaluative. And we've also improved the consultation and engagement aspect as well. Last year we had a very poor response to the public survey, which I understand was common across Wales. So what we did this year is that we trialled a small number of digital citizens panels, which we'd use to undertake face-to-face engagement with the public, but also some other stakeholders as well, including council staff, as well as the trade unions. Generally, the feeling is that those were successful, and so we're looking for lessons learned and how we can improve those going forward. And hopefully that's something that we can use for the review next year, and as well perhaps for some of the other things that we need to get done. More detail of that you can see in section 2 of the review document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Richard. Councillor Mary Jones.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see that what I just asked as a question in the previous thing is on page 84. One of your wellbeing objectives is that safeguarding people from harm and the citizens are free from harm and exploitation. But when I scroll down then to page 87, which is a little table, bear with me, because I can't remember what it says. Safeguarding progress is strong, but prospects for improvement are mixed. I looked up what mixed meant as well, so I'm wondering if we can find out where the gaps are to make this a strong objective, please.
Yes.
Sorry, Richard, over to you.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, again, I think that social services and the lead director for this particular objective would be best placed to answer it. But in broad terms, within the review itself, it identifies some of the challenges, some of the things that were discussed earlier in relation to the other report, pressures with workforce, the demands on social care and the waiting times, particularly in adult social care, and the pressures on funding in the social care market, and the resilience as well of the provider market. So those are all sort of areas which provide some uncertainty and contribute to that sort of mixed scoring. But the Director of Social Services will be able to offer a fuller explanation.
Councillor Peter Black.
Yeah, Chair, on page 101, says that we are developing a performance framework tackling poverty that defines the outcomes and measures of corporate growth. We find out what the timetable is for using this framework, please, and when it's likely to be available.
I'm sorry, Chair, I didn't hear the question.
Yeah,
I think,
sorry, I thought this was on. I'll repeat it.
oh,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
Sorry, Richard. Yeah, page
Yeah.
101. We're developing a performance framework for tackling poverty. I'm just wondering if we have a timetable for when that's going to be available and which we can look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's something that we'll have to investigate and report back on.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone online? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. There are some very interesting incidents in this, especially I noticed one about the ongoing development of procurement and some of the issues that came up from our the Audit Wales report. Some quite interesting issues in there. I won't bore everybody with all the details of it because it is quite boring, but I think it is a very good response to what's in the report. Thank you very much for that. I think if anyone else has got any more comments, if not, thank you very much, Richard, and thanks for your input.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, item 10 is the draft work programme. Can I point out a couple of things that's in the draft work programme which have changed? We are now going to be having every 3 months, so every month I will have a report basically saying what's happened with the regen. If there's anything that needs to be reported generally to all members, then I'll make sure that that is done on a monthly basis. If not, if we pick out a particular regen project, then we will have a look at that every 3 months. That means that we get a better chance to actually look into the regeneration projects once every 3 months. And generally speaking, we will just have a note from the director telling us what is actually happening. And then I will pass that on to members for that meeting. Okay. Right. And that's the work programme. You will then see the letters which have been sent on item 11, agenda item 11. And then we move on to item 12, which is the exclusion of the public. Prior to doing that, I would ask the Chief Executive if he would like, and the Cabinet members, if they'd like to say something publicly with regards to the item we're going to be discussing, and that is Copper Bay and the possible reduction in the exclusion of the individual company that's currently working there. Chief Executive, or
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, appreciate what I can say in open session is limited given the current circumstances. The reality is that will become apparent when we go through the information and the detail in the closed session. What I can say is we were advised on the 18th of August that Buckingham Group issued a notice for its intention to appoint administrator. So at that stage, they hadn't entered administration, but it gave them a 10-day standstill period that was subsequently extended to allow them to identify if there was an opportunity for somebody to save the business. We understand as of yesterday, a small part, I believe it's the rail infrastructure business, was actually taken over, I believe, by Kia Group, but the remaining business, unfortunately, then yesterday afternoon did formally enter administration, and we got confirmation of that around about 3 o'clock yesterday. As of yet, we haven't therefore been able to have a conversation with the administrator, but that is something that will follow hopefully during the course of this week. The other thing I can say is that there have been some challenges, as I'm sure it will have been noted, in terms of the delivery of the remaining element, which is the car park. The other elements have been completed and handed over, but the car park element. And we have had some ongoing challenges there and been taking some legal advice on the current situation and the previous situation over many months. And I believe we are in as strong a position as we can be and have the recourse to be able to then get that project completed as swiftly as is possible. The reality is there is headroom within the available budget to allow us to do that. And what we'll be working with officers and members over the coming weeks is to identify the best way to deliver that with a suitable contractor and then a suitable timescale that we'll be able to commit to. So that's probably as far as I can go in open session, if that's okay, Chair. But just to reassure members that we are doing everything possible to make sure we get the project delivered as swiftly as we can.
No, I've got nothing to add to that. Obviously, we are restricted what we can say in the open session, but I know that although the leader is on holiday, he has been briefed on this particular issue. Well, and I know that he will be making a statement tomorrow. But I think we are, as the chief executive has said, we are in, I'd say, a better position than most at this particular time, which will become, as was indicated, will become apparent when we go into closed sessions and we discuss some of the financial issues. But just to reassure, we are far better protected than most could be at this particular time.
Okay, that being the case, can I then move the exclusion of the public? You will see the item and the explanation on item 12. All in favour, please show. Okay, thank you. Then can I ask that the recording be ceased and that